Welcome back to The Business Language. This is a calm, conversational podcast designed to help you think in business through immersion rather than instruction. In the last episode, we talked about how consultants approach vague business problems like profits are down. Today, we're going to focus on another situation consultants face all the time, being asked to understand a market they know almost nothing about.
Which sounds intimidating, but in practice, it's surprisingly routine. The client asking the question often knows that you're an outsider. They're not testing your knowledge, they're testing your thinking.
Exactly. And once you understand the way consultants think about markets, this kind of problem becomes much less overwhelming. It becomes a process.
So let's imagine a scenario. A company comes to you and says, "We're thinking about entering a new market." No deck, no data, just that sentence.
And this is where many people feel stuck. Their first impulse is to say, I need to go research this for 3 weeks. They assume you need deep industry knowledge before you can say anything useful.
Right, the panic of the blank page. But consultants usually don't start with expertise, they start with structure.
The very first thing consultants do is define what they mean by the market, because the word itself is so vague, it's almost meaningless without clarification.
Right. A market can mean a group of customers, a category of products, a specific geography, a particular use case, any number of things.
So, the goal isn't to define it perfectly on the first try, is to define it clearly enough to start a productive conversation.
And usually that starts with a simple foundational question. Who is buying something and what problem are they trying to solve with it? What are they actually buying?
This is such an important shift in thinking. Markets aren't defined by products, they're defined by customers and their needs.
hmm Two products that look completely different on the surface can be part of the same market if they solve the same underlying problem for a customer.
Think about the entertainment market. Is Netflix competing with Disney Plus? Of course. But are they also competing with TikTok, or a good book, or going for a walk in the park?
And that's a great point. If the customer's need is, "I have 30 minutes of downtime and want to relax," then yes, all of those are competitors. How you define the customer need changes the entire landscape.
Exactly. So before you can talk about the size or growth of a market, you have to get clear on who the customer is and what job they are hiring a product to do.
Okay, so once you've collaboratively defined the market, let's say, for example, the market for high-end coffee for young professionals in a major city, the next question comes up fast. How big is it?
And this is the second place people get stuck. They think consultants have a secret database of market sizes. They don't.
Instead, they just break the question into smaller, logical pieces that they can reason about. It's surprisingly simple.
Rather than asking, how big is the market for premium coffee, they ask, first, how many potential customers are there, and then second, how much do each of those customers spend on average?
Let's walk through that. For our example, young professionals in a major city, we can find a reasonable estimate for that. Public census data or professional network statistics might tell us there are, say, 500,000 people who fit that description in the city.
Right, that's our starting population, but not all of them will be customers, so we make an assumption. Let's assume that based on some national surveys, about 40% of them are regular buyers of premium coffee.
Okay, so 40% of 500,000 is 200,000 potential customers. That's the first part of the equation. Now for the second part. How much do they spend?
Again, we make a reasonable assumption. Maybe an average customer buys 3 premium coffees a week, and the average price is around $5.
So that's $15 a week, and they probably do this most weeks of the year. So let's say 50 weeks to account for vacations. That's $750 per customer per year.
Exactly. So now we just multiply. 200,000 customers multiplied by $750 per year gives you $150 million.
And just like that, with a few logical steps and some explicit assumptions, we have a number. A huge number, but a number nonetheless. It gives you a sense of scale.
What we've just calculated is what's often called the total addressable market, or TAM. It's the theoretical maximum size of the opportunity, but of course, you can't capture all of it.
Right, so the next step is to narrow it down. Consultants often talk about the serviceable addressable market, or SAM. That's the portion of the market you can realistically reach with your business model. For a single coffee shop, you can only serve people who live or work within, say, a 10-block radius.
And that geographic constraint might shrink that $150 million TAM down to a $10 million SAM for your specific location. It makes the number much more relevant to the actual business.
And there's one more step, the SOM, or serviceable obtainable market. That's the piece of your SAM that you can realistically win from competitors. Maybe in your first year, you aim to capture 5 or 10% of that local market.
So now your target for year one is suddenly $500,000. And look at what we've done. We've gone from a vague, intimidating question, should we enter the coffee market, to a concrete, debatable business goal. Can we build a $500,000 business in this specific neighborhood?
That's the power of the process. It's not about being perfectly precise, it's about establishing an order of magnitude. Is this a niche opportunity or something that could support a large business?
Now, let's talk about all the assumptions we made. The number of professionals, their coffee habits, the price. A lot of people get very uncomfortable making so many assumptions.
They see it as a flaw in the analysis, but consultants see assumptions differently. They see them as placeholders for facts, as a feature, not a bug.
Exactly. Each assumption is just a signpost that tells you what you need to learn next. You make your assumptions explicit, you talk them through, and then you prioritize them. Which of these assumptions, if wrong, would completely change our conclusion?
That assumption that 40% of professionals buy premium coffee is pretty critical. If it's actually only 5%, the whole business case falls apart. So that becomes priority number one for research. Find the report, run a small survey, do some interviews.
It turns the giant unknown of the market into a concrete to-do list. And as you validate or refine each assumption, your model of the market gets stronger and more reliable. That's how progress happens when information is incomplete.
So, once you have a rough sense of the market size and your key assumptions, the conversation usually shifts to how the market actually functions, the dynamics.
Right. Who are the main players? How do customers choose between them? What actually drives their decisions?
And again, you start by mapping it out. Who are the competitors? For our coffee shop, the direct competitor is the other independent cafe across the street.
But there are also indirect competitors. The big Starbucks 2 blocks away, the office's free coffee machine, even an energy drink from the convenience store. Anything that solves that core need for a morning boost.
Totally. And then you have to think about the value chain. How does a cup of coffee even come to be? There are farmers, importers, roasters, landlords for the shop, baristas. Understanding where the costs are and where the profits are made tells you a lot about the business.
And crucially, you need to understand why customers choose one option over another. Is this a market driven by price, by the quality of the coffee, the ambiance of the shop, the convenience and speed of service?
And it's usually a mix. Different customer segments care about different things. The student might prioritize free Wi-Fi and a place to sit for 3 hours. The business executive on her way to a meeting wants a perfect espresso ready in under 2 minutes, no fuss.
And that's where strategy comes in. By mapping out what competitors offer and what different customers want,
You can find the gaps. Maybe every other shop is focused on speed, but no one is offering a truly comfortable, quiet place to work. That could be your opening.
You're building a mental map of the market to find the unoccupied territory.
You've hit on the next critical layer of analysis, market trends. A market isn't a
static thing. It's a living system, constantly evolving. Understanding its trajectory is just as important as understanding its current state.
So we're moving from what is the market to where is the market going? It feels like that's where the crystal ball comes in. How do you analyze trends without just guessing?
It's less about a crystal ball and more about separating the signal from the noise. Consultants do this by looking at two kinds of inputs, quantitative data and qualitative forces. The data tells you what is happening and the forces tell you why.
Let's break that down. Quantitative data would be things like market reports showing the growth of oat milk sales, or data from coffee shop apps showing that mobile orders are up 30% year over year. It's the hard numbers.
Exactly, but the numbers don't tell the whole story. The qualitative forces are the big picture shifts in technology, regulation, or culture. For coffee, a technological force might be the rise of those mobile ordering apps. A cultural force could be the growing consumer demand for sustainably sourced ingredients.
So the skill isn't just finding data, it's connecting the what to the why. The data shows people are buying more oat milk, and the cultural trend explains that it's driven by a broader shift towards plant-based diets and environmental consciousness.
And when you understand underlying forces, you can start to anticipate where the market is headed instead of just reacting to where it is now. That's how you find real opportunity.
And finding an opportunity isn't just about identifying an empty space. It's about finding a defensible space. Because once you start succeeding, you can be sure competitors will notice. So the question becomes, how do you protect your business?
This is where consultants talk about barriers to entry, or more evocatively, moats. A moat is a sustainable competitive advantage that protects your business from being overrun. It makes it hard for others to copy what you do.
There are a few classic types. The most obvious is a cost advantage. If you can produce a product or service cheaper than anyone else, whether through economies of scale or a unique process, that's a powerful moat.
Another one is high switching costs. Think about your bank or the software your company uses. It can be a huge pain to switch. You have to move all your data, retrain people. That friction is a moat. It keeps customers from leaving even if a slightly better competitor comes along.
And in the digital world, network effects are one of the most powerful moats. Social networks are the classic example. Everyone is on a certain platform because everyone else is on it. A new competitor, even with better features, has an incredibly hard time breaking in because the value is the user base.
Exactly. So for our coffee shop, the moat is probably not going to be a network effect, but it could be a powerful local brand that people trust, a unique relationship with a supplier for incredible beans that no one else has, or a long-term lease on an unbeatable location. It's about finding an advantage you can sustain over the long term.
So we've defined the market, sized it, analyzed the trends, and thought about a competitive moat. It feels like we have a solid plan. But what did still go wrong?
That's the final, crucial step in this initial analysis, thinking systematically about risk. Consultants often bucket risks into a few categories to make sure they're not missing anything obvious.
What are the main categories? And what's interesting is how similar the underlying questions are, no matter the market, whether you're analyzing coffee shops or enterprise software or dog walking services.
Different industries, same fundamental questions. Who buys? How often? Why do they choose one option over another? Who else is competing for their money?
Once you internalize those core questions, unfamiliar markets start to feel much more manageable. They're just different versions of a pattern you've seen before.
This is where real confidence comes from. It's not from knowing the answer beforehand, but from knowing how to approach the question. You learn to trust the process.
That's a huge mental shift for people who are used to academic settings, where the goal is to memorize facts instead of learning how to think with incomplete information.
So, to wrap up, when consultants are asked to understand a market they know almost nothing about, they don't panic. They don't pretend to have knowledge they lack.
They start with structure. They define the market by customer need, they size it by breaking it down into logical parts, they map out the key players and dynamics, and they use assumptions to guide their research.
The goal isn't to be right immediately, but to get less wrong over time. That's the mindset we're building here.
In the next episode, we'll talk about how consultants think about costs and why some costs matter far more than others.
Thanks for listening to The Business Language.
We'll see you next time.